Oaks. I'm the faculty director of the Center for Asian Studies. And I want to thank you all for coming to our keynote address for our CLAC week here at Center for Asian Studies here at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And I am not going to introduce our speaker tonight. I'm saving that for someone much more qualified for that than myself. But I do want to just acknowledge some people who have worked very hard to make this possible and who have devoted resources to this. And so that includes Associate Dean Kyle McJunkin of the, who's Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education here in the College of Arts and Sciences. And it's his office's program that has funded the pilot program that we've set up here to develop Asian Studies CLAC, Cultures and Languages Across the Curriculum, which we started last fall. And so we are in our second semester of that pilot program, and we are hoping to continue the program and develop it and grow it over the years to come. So for that to happen, and this is the next group of people I'll thank for helping us get this off the ground, we have to have faculty participation, and we've had some great participation from some of our faculty here on campus so far. Alan Ali in Religious Studies, Andrew Stuckey in Asian Languages and Civilizations, and Marcia Yonemoto in History. All kind of took the leap with us to develop CLAC components to their classes. And so I really want to thank them for their support and their belief in this program. I also want to thank the student facilitators who worked with our faculty to enable those courses to develop. And I also want to thank the students themselves who took those courses and are taking them as well this semester and who have kind of taken that leap with us. I want to thank Mark Pleiss, who is our CLAC coordinator at the center. And I want to thank Danielle Rochester-Salaz, who's going to introduce our speaker. This would never have gotten off the ground at all without Danielle's persistent efforts. I remember when I first started as director of the center back in 2012, one of the first things on our agenda when I started meeting with Danielle was CLAC. And here we are. It's been something that she has been trying to develop here for a long, long time, and I'm really happy that we have come this far with it so far. So thank you again for coming, and I will turn it over to Danielle.
Oh, no. Okay, yeah, so I went to my first CLAC conference in 2006, and as a Japanese major myself, I immediately felt like this is a piece that that would enhance students' language study and area studies, to sort of give them the opportunity to use language in authentic contexts in their studies, right? That language isn't just an object of study, it's also a tool for further study and for communication and all of that. And I think sometimes, when you're in your undergraduate program and just getting started, it's sort of easy to overlook what the language can do for you, and it's just another class to, you have papers and tests and grades and all of that, and it sort of gets lost that this is supposed to be also a conduit to further information. And so we're happy to have launched the program this year, and we are absolutely indebted to our speaker tonight, Saranda Gonzalez, and J.Y. Joe, who are the leaders of the CLAC Consortium. Saranda is the chair and J.Y. is the secretary, and they have really worked with us since this program's inception as we were writing the grant and saying, so there was a conference in fall of 2016 where I went and started talking to Saranda more directly about what would it take to start a program and kind of what are the pieces we need to have in place. And so since 2016, Saranda and I have been in close contact, and we certainly have taken advantage of her many years' experience with CLAC to figure out sort of where to go. And so I will just be clear that any mistakes we've made are ours, but any successes we've had are thanks to Saranda and JY. Her talk today is engaging international students through CLAC. She directed the CLAC program at Binghamton University for over 15 years. And as I mentioned, she's the chair of the CLAC Consortium, and she's here in Colorado because the CLAC Consortium conference is happening later this week at the University of Denver, and some of us will be participating in that as well. Tonight she's providing an in-depth case study of international students' experiences at Binghamton at their CLAC program, and it seems like this is a good frame for CLAC to talk about how students can be more directly engaged as campus citizens, if they're given the opportunity to use their native languages or that kind of thing, that it can really help enhance now that we have all these international students, particularly over 80% of our international students are from Asia. How do we support them once they're on campus? So we're excited to have Dr. Gonzalez Saranda here today.
So our CLAC program is called LXC, Languages Across the Curriculum, and it's our particular brand, there. I'm not there anymore. I'm working at the University of Rochester with an intensive English program sponsored by Cambridge Education Group in collaboration with the University of Rochester. And it has connections to this work for sure. Let me just say that Binghamton's program, all these programs are born differently. Binghamton's was born from a conversation with the then director of International Student and Scholar Services, Ellen Badger, a faculty member in anthropology and linguistics, and a faculty member in translation, about the wealth of language resources on campus that were untapped for academic purposes. And so, this one is born of Asian studies. Other ones are born out of language departments. And so each one has their history and it shapes who we are. And I think that my recent change to focus specifically on the international student experience and English is a direct result of the environment I came out of. So my own culture, right? So what is CLAC? Simply put, it's the radical idea that languages should be used across the curriculum in any classroom, anywhere on campus. Like that's the ultimate, right? That they're around, why aren't we using them? LOTS is a common expression for languages other than English. The LOTS are languages other than Spanish. We have our own little speak. So in other words, why are we relegating language just to the language classroom? It's a box you check off and then what? And I often ask students, so you had that language, why aren't you using it? And they look kind of, and I say, you know what, we didn't ask you to either, right? So it's a two-way street. What are we doing institutionally to have students pick up on that gen ed requirement? A little bit of background. Language folks in the room might be familiar with the 4 missions. The language specialist, we know what that is, right? PhDs, experienced majors, experts that we absolutely need. Mostly those they're sometimes applied language acquisition or languages and literatures. The liberal arts mission, why do we have a liberal arts curriculum? To expand our knowledge, to meet pluralism and global requirements, and all of the good things that we intend to happen by students taking those courses. The applied mission, language for special purposes we have in the room, knowledge of language and culture. We hear more this is important to careers, connection with the community, which ties in with the heritage mission. And this is a comment that I stole from Stephen Strait, who was my supervisor at Binghamton and one of the co-founders of the CLAC program that we have there. It sees language as a civil right rather than a civic problem. And let me just say also by way of caveat that what you're seeing here is not just me. This is a lot of us who've been working many years, and I draw on their themes. So I would like to thank my fellow CLACers. And a lot of the latter half of what you're seeing comes from our students. Where do you think most of our energies as an educational institution go to in these 4 missions?
The first 2 generally.
Yeah. And where do you think students' interests are? The third and fourth. The applied mission is where CLAC falls, and for 30 years plus, St. Olaf is one of the groundbreakers in this movement have been creating specialized programs. You might have heard of them as FLAC or LAC, foreign languages across the curriculum, languages across the curriculum. In the latest iteration, we wanted to emphasize the culture piece, and so we founded the CLAC Consortium, longer than I actually realized. The heritage mission, Binghamton, for example, has 30% of its student body that speak a language other than English on a daily basis. We're in the southern tier of New York State. We pull a lot of population from what we call downstate, New York City, but the people really in northern New York would call us downstate, right? It's all in perspective. So there are a lot of Korean speakers on campus who may not have the reading and writing ability in Korean. They've not thought before about using the Korean to help them understand business concepts or other things that they're studying in the curriculum. So our model has not been replicated any other place, and I think because there's no place like Binghamton, and each campus is experimenting with what works for them. So only 6% of students are in those classes because they want to be a language specialist. So we are missing the other 94% by the mismatch in goals, right? This is where the other 94% are, to broaden perspectives, which is kind of like the liberal arts mission, to use the language professionally and to understand their background, not in the specialist role. These are the 5 C's. If people are familiar with ACTFL standards, the American Council on Teaching a Foreign Language. Connections, we focus primarily on cultures, comparisons, communications, and communities. Meaningful use, right? So in my Russian, I can say, mother is at the sanitarium, father could not find his tie. Had I been able to have texts that were even simple newspaper articles, I probably would have been more engaged. I know the dialogues, but I don't, and I know how language works, but I couldn't use it in a meaningful way. So we're looking at opportunities to use language, not necessarily for translation, or for vocabulary building, which students report come out of the experience, but language is a way to access the content in a meaningful way. It's content enriching. If you've ever looked at articles on, the current administration from 2 even English language newspapers, you'll find different perspectives. Is it even in the paper someplace else, right? Critical thinking and content enriching, and student empowering, which is what I want to talk about today at more length. In the model that we used at Binghamton and that they continue to use, sometimes the faculty members are not familiar with the languages the students are using. So if I have a group of Chinese students in my class on U.S. history, immigration history, which is my field, I might ask them to look at what's going on now with conversations in Chinese language newspapers about immigration restriction and the possibilities in the United States. What are the Chinese newspapers saying about troops being sent to the border? Do they mention it? How is it framed? They have access to Chinese, I don't, but I know what the debates are and can kind of maybe put that in. So they're bringing those things to the front. I don't want to get too much into Binghamton's situation. I'll show you how it works, that we have a group leader, in this case, who would speak Chinese and would help students navigate through those materials if they were American-born Chinese. But we're not so concerned about what their level is or their grammar as much as we are measuring outcomes based on how it improves their understanding of the content. What we're not is content-based instruction, which colleagues have referred to as curriculum across the languages. So they're language classes with curriculum built in. We're the flip of that in feeding language into accessing the content. So the emphasis on CLAC and the way the work at Binghamton and also at UNC Chapel Hill has been described is as empowering students. In particular, this doesn't have to be international students, right? I had international in here and I took that out because we have a lot of bilingual students generally. To use those non-English language skills and knowledge to boost what they're doing in their academic realm and to counter the deficit talk of my English is really not that good. Yeah, but you have this other thing, and how can we use them together to boost both? And they're telling us, I'll show you this, that both are improving. their native language, and their English. CLAC and internationalization. Here's what we say we do, and here's my comment on what we actually do. So we're focused on student mobility, institutional partnerships, articulation agreements with curriculum, making sure we have the proper infrastructure to be able to support student mobility partnerships and the institutional commitment. And our global and diversity connections here and here are not so strong. So where is this coming in? And we'll talk about what are the benefits. Tomorrow I'm talking more to faculty-oriented group and the risk of engaging in these things. It's right, and how does it play out at the local level and at the departmental level for you? I'm talking about something called comprehensive internationalization, which I'm saying is really about sending students out and bringing students in, making collaborations and partnerships institutionally, but is leaving the classroom out of the equation a lot of the time. But we are doing some things, right? If you look at I wrote this article, what this is based on is an article I wrote with Diana Davies, who was also my former boss at Binghamton, who then went on to be vice provost for global at Princeton. That if you look at the reasons we talk about it, it's about income generation. It's about national economic and foreign policy. After 9/11, I wondered if the dialogue or the narrative was going to national security. I wonder if we're still headed that direction. What's happening to higher ed as the state funding is, right, we're not funded, we're like state associated now, right? What are the priorities of the nation and how do we fit in? How's that discourse going to change? I think international education has changed under my feet and I'm just now waking up to it. Perception gaps. There's a disconnect when we are trying to do things. So on the right-hand side, on your right-hand side, this was an institutional survey I post here that was done by NAFSA, I think in 2014, that we know it's about money, but we also think that students leave because they're the reputation, they're drawn someplace else, and they're academic undefined. Over here, yeah, it's about money, but it's about affordability, the availability of scholarships, and access to other opportunities. Academic assistance. International students don't get the role that academic advisors and other assistants play here, right? This is writing and tutoring services as well. You know, student affairs is a foreign concept to international students quite often. How are we articulating that? And I think we need to be more overt in how we do that. And it's not about just an orientation. It requires, what I'm arguing is faculty to be involved at a fundamental level, and this is not just the responsibility of student affairs professionals. So this came out in 2012. I don't know if you all are familiar with this. Danielle asked me the question, does this mean US students, and I think it was around US students, I have another quote in here from it. The concept of what a friend is quite different in Asian cultures from US cultures. But what's the campus climate like for our international students? This was 2012. It raised a lot of conversation. I think too often we're assuming that interactions are happening, and when they are happening, who's doing the work? Student groups and the Office of International Student and Scholar Services. How often do you get a call at ISSS, your student, blah, blah, blah? Yeah, right? Or in ESL, right? So the rate of social connection is significantly lower than their U.S. counterparts. And 40% said, and I bet you it's higher among Asian students, that they had no U.S. friend. Residence life also gets a lot of that, right? I'm a former residence lifer. The part about this that struck me was the fact that undergraduate students, domestic students, are not engaging either, and they're reluctant to engage. I think all students hate group work to begin with. But if you're engaging, they don't see the benefit, right? Or maybe they're not equipped with, there's a lot of questions here, with how to engage at that level. One of the things I was talking earlier to faculty about is we worked with our domestic students in teaching them how to work with a non-native English speaker. How could you do an interview? What are the kinds of intercultural communication skills you need around that? And it was CLAC, because it was about language and communication in that way. But it happened to be about English, right? And there are multiple Englishes if we want to go down that road. This has been a particularly interesting series of months. Did you all, anybody know about this? Right? That the FBI issued a statement that, the date here is February 15th, that Chinese students and scholars on our campuses are a threat to national security, and if we don't realize that, we're very naive. And then there is the question of, in March, are we going to limit the I-20s for incoming international students from China? And then today, I saw that this was in Inside. I thought, what are the chances that there'll be something in today's Inside Higher Ed about this? And lo and behold, there it was, that the Confucius Institutes, campuses that are considering hosting them or campuses that already have them, are being questioned, and this one is is closing at the request of a congressman. What is the campus response? Who's responsible for this? Is it enough to say this is a welcoming campus, or are there other things we can do? And I'm arguing that there are many other things we can do in our practice. So I do what I ask students to do. I thought you might find this amusing. I went to China Daily to see what it is saying about the FBI. And I like the cartoon quite a bit. My favorite part is here that this happened right after the Parkland school shootings, where the FBI was called and warned by local residents about the student, but according to this article, maybe they were too busy looking at Chinese students instead of dealing with the actual information on the ground that was reliable. What a shift in perspective, right? So what do we mean by, I think CLAC has this under it, and we haven't maybe been as explicit about it because we're focused more on language and culture, but it really is about the meaningful integration of international students, and it's not just a responsibility, subtext, it's not just a responsibility of student affairs professionals. Do you have faculty training on campus that deals with the presence of international students on campus or academically? So when it's there, it's about intercultural skills. It never really doesn't get down to the nitty-gritty though, with faculty of maybe changing how you teach, maybe changing the content, the emphasis, and maybe integrating students' experience. So this goes, I said to Danielle earlier, what's good for international students is good for everyone. So how can we do some of that? DACA is a different beast in terms of understanding what those students are going through. I also think that there's a lack of understanding about the realities facing international students, like the things I just showed you about visas and the concerns they have about falling below full-time equivalencies and what that means. I don't know that faculty are thinking about that as part of what's going on out in their classrooms. So the conversations most often are focused on adapting and acculturating, which is important for students. But one of the things we found was that students may actively suppress what they're doing in their target language. They're reading books about American history in Chinese or websites, and that's fine. I actively encourage them to bring that into the discussion. What are they finding? How reliable is it? How does it stand up to the measures that we put in place? I'm a historian by training, to evaluate a source. And we start to talk about how those texts talk to one another and the dissonance that they might create. So we're asking through CLAC for multilingual students to use their unique cultural and linguistic skills, and sometimes they may not be what we think they are, but at what level they have them, to use them in service of their academic success. You can do it in pretty much any subject, depending on how you frame it, and I think it sheds light on all aspects of the higher education experience for them to even talk about what is student affairs and why do we have it. The fact that they don't have it, for example. So why use this? Why are we asking students to do this? And why should Chinese students on campus be using Chinese to learn about history? They're already fluent in Chinese. So the argument is that it's as they're increasing their vocabulary in Chinese and they're increasing their English, self-reported. It'd be interesting to have another study on this to see how students in these CLAC sessions, there's more research, right? This is an initial study. oftentimes they confuse their lack of understanding of the concept with their lack of understanding of English and vice versa. So this kind of clarifies some of that. And if we're having our students rely on English texts only, aren't we replicating the closed lens that we're trying to expand through internationalization? Right? What can it do to open up those perspectives? Students who are engaged in this kind of multilingual environment are more advanced in their intercultural learning than other students. I always say international students don't come to us pre-internationalized just because they're from someplace else. The research shows that this learning is contextualized, enriched for all learners and for faculty. And again, we're steering away from deficit talk to how this serves as an asset for them. It's part of that empowerment. And sometimes they just need to be told, like, you can use this and it's okay. Because they're always, right, worried about their English. As our language students are always worried about how poor their Spanish or insert the language is. Right? So this is the flip side of that, right? So we're using CLAC in these classes to kind of unpack knowledge within disciplines, how it's constructed, perspectives on the wall, perspectives on World War II we were talking about earlier today, and how are our institutions, does it also give us a broader perspective on how our institutions are working and how higher education works differently in different places. So CLAC as student empowerment. Some of this is a little repetitive, but I wanted to pull some of this out of here to emphasize here that we're going beyond the instructor's knowledge. Somebody said today, and I told him I was going to use this comment, that CLAC shows you how incompetent you really are. And we said it's a good reminder. Like, even in English, if all my students were using English only, I am not fully familiar with all the resources that they're able to pick up. I mean, right? I'm able to evaluate that, but I'm not going to read what they have read. And it's true if they're using other languages. And I also wanted to draw on, I don't know if you're familiar with Terrell Strayhorn's discussions about student belonging, feelings of belonging and student retention and success at our institutions. And I put this quote up there. He's from the Ohio State University. You know, what are we putting into our heads, both figuratively and literally? So this is how Binghamton works. There's a content course with these study groups around it. And this is the MARC, who coordinates with the faculty member, the leadership of group 1, 2, and 3. Okay, but they're all in the same course. We had always done surveys on the students, and then I kept hearing things from my staff, and it seemed like the outcomes were the same in many ways. And so in 2015, we did a survey of the leaders, the students that were leading this group, who are advanced undergraduates and graduate students, to learn about the ways over time, right? A lot of your outcomes are happening 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road that you don't capture, so long term. On 3 key areas, and this, my staff, the graduate student staff I had, was very instrumental in helping me put all this together, and I owe a debt of gratitude to them. To think about how it affected them academically, how it affected them as students, right? Academically, their professional lives, and I have student leaders here, but it was really about socialization. In that way, I think you could classify it as leadership and development and their sense of belonging. So I took these 3 things, and you'll see I'll break it down by different elements. These were the responses on what I called interculturality. First one, imagining viewpoints different from my own. So these leaders are often international students who had to learn about how is it to facilitate a discussion with different viewpoints. What are the different viewpoints? The second one was giving me new perspectives on other non-U.S. cultures, which could have been their own or another. So I was super pleased with these responses. And I have a series of quotes here from them, that they had not thought about how language and culture affected people's opinions before. In terms of culturality, new perspectives. They taught me to appreciate many competing perspectives that shape global power relations from their students and the discourse. A lot of times the international students were working with primarily American-born students who might have been American-born Chinese or heritage speakers of those other languages. And so they didn't, I know there were discussions about how Chinese is Chinatown from the different viewpoints. This one is from a Canadian, I'm pretty sure from one of our Canadian LRSs. It gave me a sense of how to relate my North American but non-Anglophone cultural perspective to those of English-speaking peers, thinking about identity and how it connects in. And I started questioning things on matters I took for granted. Great responses there. CLAC and Connection. My situation wasn't unique. In fact, this is the majority situation. What a kind of an empowering thing for a student to realize. Because they think it's just me. And they're not going to say to somebody else, I'm having this problem. Or they might in the group. But they learn, oh, it's not just the Chinese students, it's also the Indian students, and it's also the Spanish-speaking students. And, hey, it would be interesting, too, to see if these, I'm thinking ESL, if this comes out in ESL classrooms in more ways, then it creates a community that goes across those divides. But if you look at, counter evidence, if you look at how our international student population is, it's not really that diverse within itself. Often, right? Heavily Chinese, Indian, Saudi, I think. Is that the third group here on campus? Enhancing language skills, this, again, self-reported, encouraged me to read in languages other than English, so we're promoting exactly the problem, right, that you're saying. Lower on the level, enhance their English skills, but still, a substantial proportion, and enhance my target language skills, which kind of makes sense. The idea of belonging. So I talked a little bit earlier about students, heritage language learners, who maybe grew up speaking Spanish, but they never ever thought about it for use in any way. It's kind of, this is a language for home. It's not a language to use in an academic setting. How about that? I grew up in West Virginia in a bilingual community, and I had so much in common with the New Yorker kids I met in Binghamton. Wildly different experiences, but linguistically kind of the same thing. There were options for me: be a Spanish teacher if I was going to use my language, right? Until I found, and I was a language major, until I found CLAC as a student. Understanding the value added of their unique perspectives and skills. And these are from graduate students. And I started thinking about campus climate. These two bring that home to have that from the outside, and not just maybe from international students in an ESL class, but from others on campus who are interested in these backgrounds. And the next slide is from a graduate student who I worked with long before this survey went out. And this is part of the anecdotal evidence. So she's looking at how, she's getting a better understanding of how Chinese Americans see her. What are those differences? So as I was talking to Diana, we were putting the survey together, she said, why don't we put something in here about empathy? I've been thinking about empathy a lot. And I was like, okay. And it was the highest percentage of the outcomes here. What a great intercultural outcome to build empathy among students. Here's something about diversity. Our conference, starting on Wednesday, is about the intersection of diversity and international. We've had a lot of conversations. I've had a lot of conversations with students about diversity in the United States and in ways they think it doesn't exist in their countries. Racial diversity, gender diversity, LGBTQ issues, you name it. I listed here their professional outcomes that they saw, but also wanted to put down here self-reflective about their own learning process, tying back into their success. They started to think about their own classroom participation as we were structuring assignments to increase the participation of their students. And one of the comments was, we're learning about the American education system from the inside out. They had not taken it apart in this way as something to be explored, looked at, taken apart, put back together. So 90% of them said that the CLAC sessions that we had, they with their students and us as a team of instructors, was like no other place they had on campus in terms of its diversity of international and the cross-cultural language learning and teaching aspects of it. So a week or so ago, as I was getting ready to, what is the date on here? March 13th, okay, not a month ago, this article came out from in Inside Higher Ed by Mary Jane Curry and Teresa Lillis. MJ Curry happens to be a faculty member at the School of Education at the University of Rochester, and I know her. And she sits at the intersection between foreign language acquisition and ESL kind of things. So we have a lot to talk about. I see this article come out about using English as the lingua franca in journals, and this goes back to Tim's point about faculty. Are we disempowering bilingual faculty in the ways, and international faculty, in ways that we assume English is the lingua franca of journals that are legitimate for publishing to count towards tenure? And they looked at the Web of Science. They have a book out. This is just an opinion piece that they wrote that pulls citations from English and the journals that we are privileging, but look at the number of journals in these other languages. So I'd like to dig down deeper into that. And when we're pulling our data, we were talking earlier today about teaching students to use Google and other sources. What are the drawbacks? We're doing this ourselves in some ways. Sometimes international faculty, there was a study done at Iowa, are more reluctant than others to engage in CLAC kinds of activities for these very reasons. They're not talking about their international experiences. So I put a couple of questions up here in terms of food for thought about things we might be able to do without getting overwhelmed by the amount of things that might open up in a class. And maybe having strategic alliances with other places on campus between academic affairs and student affairs or a department.
When you send your kids on study abroad in high school, there's all this stuff about culture shock, about how this is going to change you, what does it mean, all that stuff, and then what does it mean to just have kids, their parents said, you're going to America to college, there you go, boom.
Listen, I'll give you an example. I belong to the gym, I pay my membership every month, and look at me. What up? And they look at me like, I'm like, are you feeling that way? Because you're only going to get out of this what you put in. And I can preach that to them, domestic and international alike. I want to know why they're there. And I would turn that on. What motivates you? Like, what are we going to do? We have this thing to get through, right? We talked a little bit about this. They're not used to it.
Yeah.
Often, students in general. They've not, the 3 students today who were outstanding in the history class that I talked to, they have never had a class that asked them to get their hands in the material and deal with it in this way. So it's new to them. Just like we think that students are what do they call them, digital natives, they don't know how to use it for academic purposes. They give them Facebook, they're going to do what they normally do on it, right? So I think we have to, and I started to say today, we need to be really more explicit about this and prompt them, I think, what their goals are. What do they even want to be here? Or did their parents tell them that this would be a good major? Right? And if that's the case, then what do we do with that? And it opens up, I mean, I'm asking academic affairs folks to get engaged, and it opens up a lot of possibilities for issues, right? You have a team to support, but it's a lot of work, a holistic approach to this. And how do we build from ground up? I saw you guys are hiring a director of international student success. I mean, there are ways that this structure can work for you too.
So I think another piece of this from a faculty perspective is thinking about training students. So one of the things that we are often kind of, I don't know where this comes from, but this idea that part of my job is to make sure that you learn this. I'm not, or to put it a different way, I'm not doing you any favors by allowing you to continue kind of in your training bubble, right? You need to break out of that. You need to engage the material in English. You need to kind of integrate yourself. So I think it's difficult for faculty to get their heads around the idea that there are ways that students could continue to stay in that bubble to a certain extent that would help them with their education and would also contribute to the class in new ways.
Right, depending on the class size.
Well, yeah. I mean,
and we're talking about small group. This class today, the students peer-to-peer,
right. And
it forced them to engage. Why?
But there's a very careful balance there between that idea of, you need to be able to do this in English, right? But you also would be great if you could also use the resources that we have.
And
How do you?
what are they doing
how
now?
do you do that?
We don't know.
Right.
At least in this scenario, we kind of know. A student will come to me and say, you know how we do that LXC thing? Yeah, I think Tim would be good. Why don't you talk to him? So I'll go talk to Tim. Tim, you're teaching this class. A student suggested that you might be open to this student-centered model of learning. What do you think about that? Sure, let's talk about the logistics. So we would work out. He's picking 3 themes that he wants students to explore in 10 weeks. And I show up in class. It's written into his syllabus. This is what the experience is. And this is the trade-off. If you do path A, you do this, or you could do the non-LXC path, which is the traditional. And I get volunteers. So they're 100% volunteer to do it. No one's forced to do it. When that happens, my staff will go crazy because you have students who are there that have the money. And we would negotiate how much of that is in Chinese, how much is in English, what are the needs of the group linguistically, both in their Chinese and in their English. And so sometimes, if it were all native speaking Chinese, we might have an English language facilitator for that group instead of Chinese, or somebody who's bilingual.
We have three so far that we've done. One was native speakers of Chinese exclusively. One was is currently second language learners of Japanese exclusively, and one was students who had no language exposure whatsoever, and they focused on culture. So
And it wasn't planned, but it was beautiful.
It was going to be Arabic language with Intro Islam class, but the students who were interested were not hadn't had exposure to language, so they did culture and sort of a little bit of word kind of level language stuff, but not full text or anything.
I mean, a lot of this is really about bringing your whole person to the class. So we were talking to a student today who's from Alaska, and we were talking about how we learned U.S. history. And I bet she got a lot more Native American history than I did in West Virginia. I got a lot of Civil War history in school. She didn't have a lot of Civil War history. I mean, that's cultural, regional culture. And I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. But, you know, we all come with different pieces. I feel a little overwhelmed by the need that's there and the lack of resources to make it stand up. What can I do in my own classroom? And some faculty members have taken that on to adopt these, to ask students to bring in materials. I don't want to point out international students and say, okay, you Chinese students are going to do this kind of thing, but on a voluntary basis. And I think it came out in today's discussion with the students. They're not, the students who are language learners are not doing this because somebody told them not to do it or that they couldn't do it. But no one's ever told them that they could. And once you open that door and you guide them through it, the statistics from our students, and these aren't the students, these are leaders, are showing that they're carrying that skill to the next class. They're trying it again. They're exploring their favorite soccer team and reading news from other places about it, right? And it starts to open up other doors for them to continue to use that skill. Teaching them how to explore other languages, doing research, finding source materials, showing them the journals, thinking about what primary sources in the target language and how to take those apart based on the theoretical stuff they're learning in class. And it is about giving them control, a lot. You know, even having them do a 2-line summary of what the article is for you. And, I don't know, you're not recording this, right? Like putting something into Google Translate and looking at it gives me a general idea. But I might, you know, you have other language experts on campus to help us do that. And so one of the models that is one of my favorites is all around research, and it's at Skidmore. So it's a French class. The students bring in questions from all their other classes. They have the language expert there, and they have the content expert on the other side, and they work together towards a research project. Requires high-end language level. and departmental support of that language faculty to do that research level course. But why not? Yeah, the library is just one of the most multilingual places on campus, but it's not seen as that. At Binghamton, they changed the front of the library. It says library in many languages, which I love because it represents what's inside of it. But the library website doesn't, which is where students are going, right, to look for materials. And they created a finding resources in other languages there because we have all those databases. And I have kept talking to you about centered learning and teaching.
Yeah.
Right, that there's disciplinary things, and then there's the international within that. Because, I mean, I couldn't tell you how to teach physics. I can tell you some international components you might find in the classroom. So, you know, I realized too that the students out there can change and aren't the same. And the questions start really different. Like, do you consider slavery a genocide? Everybody's like, where's that student's from? Okay, 250 students. And we were talking about the potato famine, and it was, sure enough, in the text it said genocide. Well, we hadn't seen that word before. I thought about that word in new ways and changed that lesson for that group. Because the American students had no idea where this question came from. So, but to be able to stop and change, it took me a long time to do that, but I felt an accountability because I had a question that needed to be addressed. And I thought it was a good teaching moment. Yeah, the structure, I have not seen a robust structure that I can recommend looking at, but there may be ones out there that would be a great another class presentation on how Centers for Learning and Teaching are using CLAC strategies.
I was just at a conference in Hawaii. I flew in this morning at 7 a.m. But they have this, in their Hindi program, it seemed a little bit like CLAC to me. They, like here, we don't have room to have Hindi and Urdu, so we try to put them together, which is tricky. And it means that we won't do one of them justice, in this case, it's Urdu. And in Hawaii now, it seems like a CLAC thing. In their Hindi courses, they have a one-unit co-seminar of Urdu. And I thought, and it's been really successful, so students don't have to take it, but they are working basically with the same language in a new script and a bit of new vocabulary, a tiny bit of grammar. And then they do that in an intermediate year, and they come back together in the advanced year.
I think it's a great example.
Yeah.
We have to talk. I have to know who that is. That's a good, I mean, if you look at the CLAC manifesto, it will tell you that CLAC happens everywhere with the language classroom. And I'm starting to see ways that alliances, there are CLAC-ish things, and I think that we made that statement in order to push it out, but there are really a lot of connections between ESL and what we're doing. I think ESL has a very diverse experience. And some of the language components too, and sometimes it's in the lesser what they call epistles, the less commonly taught languages.
That's nice to hear, really nice to hear, because it's a problem for every South Asia program that doesn't have tons of money to have 5 or 6 South Asian languages. If we can just have one, then we do this split thing, and it's really, some students don't want Urdu at all, and for whatever reason, and then the ones who really want it aren't getting much of it. And so I think I'm glad to hear it's a possibility.
And I wonder, like long range, are there Urdu students going on to study? Will there be are they trying to build an Urdu program in this way? Is there a? That's
probably way out, because we also want to add Sanskrit. That's also, so several things will happen before we provide something. I mean, there's not really enough demand, but I think that, yeah, one unit site course. The question is, can the instructor do it? Does the instructor get paid for an extra unit? Do students pay for an extra unit? And I was told that the ones who take on the sort of co-seminar do often are attracted to Farsi as well. So then we do have Farsi, so they can kind of supplement the Urdu training there.
So CLAC